Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we are going to be discussing criminality and asking the hard questions, that which we maybe know in the back of our heads is causing the actual crimes in our reality, but we haven't yet dug in further. And for this, we have Andrea Rossouw-Starsi with us from South Africa. Hi, Andrea. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Great that you are able to make it here. And also, you are a criminal psychologist, is that correct?
Yes, I studied psychology, and then my minor was criminology, which I really enjoyed because I worked as a police reservist for many, many years. And that's where you could say my interest in criminology and understanding how crime develops, that's how that all came from. So when I could study psychology, I was very glad I could do that as my minor.
Great. And we're very glad because we will be discussing precisely these psychological aspects, what's behind the veil of the making of a criminal. So before we get into the discussion, I'd like to remind everyone watching that we have questions and comments open. You can place them throughout the live transmission or later on in the YouTube video, questions for Andrea or myself. So Andrea, let's begin with this. What is behind the making of a criminal? Are criminals born or are they made? What would you say?
Well, from my perspective, I would say there's a lot that goes into passing down of specific traits and personalities that could contribute to, let's say, for example, a person becoming a criminal. But let's say the nature versus nurture argument. But what I'd like to bring across is that even if a person is, for example, born with mother-father traits of, let's say, easily angered or easily depressed, or those kind of personality constructs, we still need to look here at what happens to the person as they grow up in our system to push the person into a life of crime. Now, here we're looking at, for example, which obviously in a lot of criminology studies, we're already seeing this coming through, the understanding of the person, for example, coming from a low-income environment, abusive environments, environments of drug abuse and other forms of abuse, environments where the person is already in a crime environment. It becomes easier for them themselves to follow life of crime. So here, what is being followed through currently in criminology studies is some form of an understanding, but what we're not seeing coming through clearly, which is what this discussion is about, is the solution where we're saying, okay, let's take this group decided to rob or steal or murder, and let's walk a timeline of events that happen in this person's life that push them to the point of becoming a criminal. Then let's go and address those issues, the causes. That's not really coming through clearly, because obviously if it did, we wouldn't have jails packed full of people, where in society we've obviously created this separation between criminals over there. They're these bad people that do bad things, and shame on them. Let's put them in jail. Let's study why they do things. I mean, that's the study of criminology. But when it comes to actually changing the underlying problems, we're not seeing that coming through clearly at all.
Yeah, and that's the whole importance of having this discussion, because many times we only, just accept the fact of, oh yes, our prisons are overpopulated, oh yes, the prison system is profitable, oh yes, we're spending so much on keeping inmates in prisons, but we don't really look at, okay, but what are we doing as a society that is causing actual criminals? So you are mentioning in part of your investigation relevant aspects that we don't usually consider, and hence the title of this hangout, which is, what are the values that we as a society have accepted and that live by, that contribute to the emergence of crime or the creation of crime?
Right. What is happening all the time, and I mean, I can use any country as an example, but seeing is happening right now, is children and people are being impulsed the whole time with specific value systems. Let's say, for example, it's the self-fulfillment value system where we link in the ultimate idea of happiness and self-fulfillment with being able to attain things, being able to buy things, have things, what I look like, what I can do, what car I drive, what house I have. And these are the societal value systems that you could say it's our spiritual attainment, that we perceive to be self-fulfilled as a human, means to have material things and who I am and how I'm seen within the system. Now, obviously your people who do marketing for capitalism and your psychologists that study human behavior, they understand how these things work. So they're constantly impulsing people on TV, in the movies. We understand how these things work, constantly being impulsed with, look, you can have that car. Look, you can be beautiful like that. But to have that car and to have that beauty, every single realizes, but I need money. And because the majority of the world's population is living on minimum wages, what is going to happen if year after year from very young, you're impulsing people with these ultimate desires, then you're linking that also to the fact that they're earning minimum wages. And so after a while, the person, and this, as I said, obviously happens all over the world, but we see that a lot in South Africa, you tie in minimum slave wages with the ultimate self-fulfillment and happiness is to have things. And that's where a person starts considering, okay, but wait a minute, I can turn to a life of crime. For some people, I mean, there's danger involved. You could get arrested, you could get hurt, you could get killed in jail. But for most people, I mean, if you're looking at, first of all, being able to provide yourself your bare essentials, food, a roof over your head, those are desperate situations where people will be pushed and they'll have to do it. And if you've got a starving child, you will turn to crime to feed your child. Then we're talking, so that's like really desperate levels. But then we're also talking about a person who, for their entire life, lives in absolute poverty. Every day on the billboards, they're seeing beautiful people driving beautiful cars. But I could have that. I just need to also turn to a life of crime. And then this starts developing the criminal mind. I mean, we're not here even talking about murder and rape and those kind of other type of mindsets. We're talking about here things like ways of getting money and ways of getting income. So the things that we in society are considering fun, and we like playing around with self-fulfillment as my value, as what I can attain, which is linked to money. But we're not considering, even though the research is there, that this is having a major impact on people. But we don't take responsibility in connecting those dots because it's seen as fun. Because that person chose a life of crime, why must the rest of us be punished by not having beautiful cars and beautiful houses? And so there's a fine line between the mindset of the one and the other that we're not taking into consideration.
Absolutely, and there's also the aspect of easy money. I mean, we do see the ultimate epitome of the elite people that get access to everything, right? And in that we see that, well, it should be easy. Why isn't it easy for me? So within the criminal mindset, there's also this idea that I can also get easy money. I can just go and rob and get a lot more money than I would get from my minimum wage, and aspire to be equal to that elitist person. What's your perspective on this?
Yes, definitely. I mean, what is the one thing that we see constantly in movies? We see like people who start up businesses and next thing they're making money and they drive flashy cars. Then they have the beautiful woman. Then they have beautiful, intelligent children. And in our mindset, there's this cognitive dissonance where we're given these pictures of how easy money can be given and can be created, especially like, for example, living the American dream where it's so, and then we get told, you just need to work hard, these little statements, and then we see these lives and the desire that builds up in every person. I want that. And everything seems easy when you wake up in the morning and everything is there, your food, you can do with your life what you want. And this is constantly being impulsed in movies to make every person think, I could just have that, the ultimate happiness perspective. And then obviously life of crime seems to be, especially if you tie it in with, also that mindset of I only have this one lifetime. This is my one life. God created me to be happy. So, my religion tells me that I only have this one life and I should be ultimately happy. But if we're not realizing that constantly we're bombarding people with, but happiness means to have money, that starts creating a problem.
Exactly. And with this desire for money and this ultimate life, which is not possible at this moment to give to everyone to the extent of that, as you were mentioning, the American dream, then we have the psychological aspect, which is your point of expertise, in terms of what role does the lack of understanding our human emotions, our psyche, have in the shaping and creation of this criminal mindset?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how we are raised as human beings, we're taught that, for example, our emotions and feelings and what comes up inside of me as my thought patterns, everything in and as me is real and it's valid. This is how I was created. As children, we grow up in our screen system, in our home environments, being taught what is in me is completely valid. And children grow up and are unfortunately not taught responsibility within our emotions and feelings and what comes up inside of me. So to give you an example, if we observe, for example, what's going on in YouTube, you switch on YouTube and you see thousands of videos of people abusing each other and humiliating and harming and doing things that are completely chaotic. But if you look at what is going on inside of the person, you'll see that it is what we perceive as normal human experiences that are being allowed to be brought forth into expression. Anger, jealousy, rage, frustration. I mean, part and part, most of those experiences, if you actually were to go and interview those people, it has a lot to do with their own frustration, which links back to the point we just made now. Frustration at, why don't I get to do what I want in life? Why do I have an abusive home environment? So a lot of that is an outlet for these children. But also it's a form of acceptance. We as a society have said, oh, well, we were created that way. So, let them let off steam. It's natural for us to, get into these anger and jealousy rages. So a lot of it has to do with how we as children are brought up believing that what inside of me is absolutely natural and I should find a form of expression in it. And then we even have, things like sport and platforms like that where if you don't watch sport, people actually look at you like you're weird. Because sport is one of the platforms where we get to express our frustrations and our angers and all of these emotional and feeling experiences that come up inside. So that, if you draw a parallel between what many criminals go through inside themselves, the criminal, if you interview them, criminology studies will show that they also experience rage, anger, jealousy, all of those things, and they acted on them. But we tend to look at what is busy going on in society and is obviously escalating exponentially, is that we too are allowing these experiences inside of ourselves to boil up, and then we put it on YouTube and it's seen as funny. Or in society, we'll support each other. Oh, my best friend, she got so jealous of her boyfriend. Oh, shame. And then we'll, cuddle each other and we'll work through the thing. But we won't actually, at any stage, really assess that the platform of what exists in the criminal is the same as what exists inside of me. And yes, I might not go out and stab somebody. But if you look at the original platform of the human experience, the human psyche, consciousness, as it exists, it's all the same. And it is escalating. I mean, that we're seeing very clearly. It is escalating. A lot of people that, for example, on our forums and things like that we work with, for themselves, they're starting to see, whoa, I'm losing control in that area of my life, or I just slapped, or I went into a possession. Therefore, it exists in all of us. And, again, in your psychology studies and your criminology studies, they will separate these things. They won't say, okay, but you see how these things linked? Everything is like separated, and criminal does that and they're bad. Okay, the person does this, but it's part of our design. It's fine. So, yeah.
So there is this acceptance of this human nature that we obviously see also as the root and cause of the problem that goes mostly unnoticed, or I would say investigated, to actually see that, you know, we do create ourselves as crimes and we actually develop the conditions that enable this. So if we look at the system and how it is constructed, there is an inherent desire to obviously kind of rebel. For example, people of low income households grow up with this idea of, oh, the police is bad, the system is bad. And you know what's used there is the idea of free will. Oh, well, you know, if I was oppressed by the system this way, I'm going to use my free will to get around my way. So how does this relate to developing criminal mindset or activities?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that we're all taught. And it's almost like if you even look at what the politicians use, they themselves are not really effectively supporting humanity. But they'll say to people, oh, don't worry, you have free will. It's the land of the free. And use your individuality. And through that, we're given permission and we give ourselves permission to do and say what we want. And what's actually interesting, you know, obviously if you observe now with the new laws and things where they're getting stricter with, for example, what people can say and what people can place on the internet, where everything is becoming more controlling. And yet at the same time, it's like, okay, we all have free will and individuality, but oh dear, look at what free will and individuality is doing. We have to bring in more control systems. And now people are realizing, oh, internet bullying, victimization, you know, all of those things, defamation of character, that's becoming a problem because these things are often leaching over into people being harmed. I mean, whether it's you attacking my character or my internet persona that I have that's linked to my business, it's who I am. These things are becoming more and more serious. From there, it could lead to people physically being attacked. So this whole emphasis that's being placed the whole time on you have free will. You can say and do what you want to. Often in those cases, you have one group over here doing and saying what they want, another group going, I don't agree with what you do, so I'm going to use free will to bash you on the internet, or if I can even find you, people say to each other, I'm going to physically harm you. And I mean, you know, so free will in itself is often being used as an excuse for us not really to take responsibility for our actions because, again, it ties into the point of this is my one life. I must be able to do what I want. Who can tell me what I can do with my life? Yeah.
Exactly. And let's talk about also the broader aspect of the crimes against life, which are less seen as harmful or abusive activities, but that we all actually participate in. Can you explain more to us about this?
Right. So we all understand that crime, as it is categorized currently, is your war, murder, rape, this, that, you know, those kind of things that are your obvious crimes. Now, what we consider, or what I consider crimes against life, are your things that we haven't really by law established are crimes. And these would be things that are sort of happening, you know, behind the scenes. For example, if you look at what is happening currently in capitalism, every single day of beings are dying and being harmed in the name of capitalism, where, for example, people are, just to give you some examples, people are working in factories that are minimum wages in buildings that collapse. These people are dying so that you and I can wear our t-shirts. That's sort of covered up. That is, you know, everybody just goes, if you speak about it, everybody goes, yeah, but, you know, someone's got to do the work and I need to be dressed. So these are crimes against life, and obviously you have millions of examples of them. Just starting with the basic thing where people earn minimum wages, that's a crime against life because that person does not have the ability to even provide for their basic needs. They don't have access to decent food, safe roof over their heads, water, and being able to get across to where they need to go, and education and so forth, healthcare. Why is that not a crime against life? But if that person then has to go and steal to provide for their child, they'll get locked up because we have now broken a law that is conditioned as a law. So those are many examples. I mean, if you look at how animals are harmed and abused, and what we're doing to our planet and things like that, and those would be, there are millions of examples of how we can look at, for example, getting back to the YouTube example. I mean, how many times have we all come across material on the internet where people are harming each other, abusing animals, and we click on the button, or we see pornography and we click on the button and we report it, and then we get told, no, and they might say it's freedom of expression, and they might say, no, it's fine, let them be, they didn't harm anybody. Are those not crimes against life? Those are basic examples of where we're more and more, and it's getting worse. Have you noticed how everything we're doing is getting worse and worse and worse? And the basic laws remain the same. I mean, obviously some things that there are, we are starting to question, and laws are changing, but it's almost like we have to wait to happen before let's change some laws now.
I lost you a little bit at the end, but I'd like to get onto this point of structural violence now that you mentioned that, we haven't really typified in our laws this kind of abuses. So structural violence actually points out how this system in itself, as it currently exists now, does have these functional aspects that are inherently abusive, and it has direct effect, harm, abuse, even the death of not only human beings but living beings overall. So what can you tell us about this?
Right, yeah, so I mean, people are welcome to read up about, basically, in a nutshell, structural violence that is done in and by this world system, or organizations in the world system, that is seen as valid because it serves some form of purpose. For example, war would be seen as structural violence because it serves a purpose, which we all have been taught is one country declaring war on another country because they're protecting us from the bad other people. But if you actually really go and do your research into war, you'll always see they're fighting over resources, and they're fighting countries' resources, and how to control those people, and so forth. And lots of people are being harmed and murdered and abused when what is actually happening in the background is that a war is being fought instead of people working together and everybody being taken care of and people in the countries getting along and us working things out. There have to be wars fought. Obviously, we can go into the mechanics of how war will work, but we're not going to talk about that now. But even the soldiers that harm the civilians, that kill the civilians, it's seen as justified. But if you go look at the reason behind why wars are fought, and if you look at, like the example that I gave about capitalism, those would be justified reasons of why it's okay that lives are lost, because somebody has to do the work. Oh, but the boss, he's entitled to take his profits. That's why he didn't make sure that the building structure was effective. Things like that. These are all justifications, and you can, if you really research, all forms of people getting hurt and people being abused has a reason behind it. And we've all come to accept that those reasons are justified.
Exactly, and even more so when we have a profitable prison system nowadays. So every inmate and every person that you can incarcerate without really getting to understand why and how they were maybe pushed to commit a crime to survive, none of that is investigated because we, even in this structural violence, have a profitable prison system. What can you tell us on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's we tend to look at prisons as being, obviously, like I said right in the beginning, the place where we shovel the people that have done bad things. We haven't realized that prisons have actually become multi-billion-dollar money-making industries, where each part of the prison system, because we're not dealing with the underlying problem of why it is just continuing and it's escalating. And then what is happening is that capitalists are going, oh, cool, prisons actually, wow, you need to have millions spent just on the food for the prisoners. Then you need security for the prisoners. You need, I mean, I read about the statistics of how much it costs to run some of these prisons and how private companies, have now basically provided services for each of these categories, and it's, like I said, multi-billion-dollar, and therefore it's become a business. So from that side, the capitalists are not exactly very keen to go, let's work out the problem, because unfortunately it's become a business.
And it's also part of the taxpayers' money, actually. I mean, in California, it's $10 million every year to maintain prisons, and now they have created a law, Proposition 47, wherein they will be starting to release people that maybe were incarcerated for drug possession or drug use, which is a very common way to get thousands and thousands of people, like 120,000 people in jail just because of drug use and possession. So with the decriminalization of drug use and possession, then that can be a little bit sorted out, but essentially it's really not yet looking at the source of the problem. So let's move on to the solutions to all of this. Let's look at first, what would you say is required in terms of rehabilitation?
We could start, as I mentioned in the beginning, we could start with, as a society, understanding the experience that happens inside of us, like we said in the beginning, where if we, in our education system, already start educating the human to better understand ourselves and to better be able to deal with conflict, deal with emotional experiences, do not necessarily just say, oh, it's all natural, let it out. To find productive ways of purifying ourselves, of coming to understanding of, okay, maybe all of this exists, but we don't have to accept that all of this exists inside of us. So if we start with that point of rehabilitating the entire human race into, not just saying, okay, I want my candy now, but I know it's going to give me a rotten tooth, to actually get to a point of understanding, okay, if I'm going to take for granted all of this and let it into expression on my world is going to turn to chaos and I'm going to abuse. So there's a point of self-responsibility that we can really teach children. We can make it possible with, giving each person an income, obviously. We're going to eradicate many, many problems. I mean, we're looking here, obviously, these topics have been explained in many different ways of what will happen to the person if you give them a decent income. I mean, will I still be turning to life of crime if my needs were met? Would I still be frustrated, and because I'm in such fear because I can't pay my bills? I'm in such fear because I can't feed my children. What does that fear do to a person? I mean, bringing it back to the point of the people lashing out on YouTube, harming and abusing, will that change a person's entire psyche? I mean, who will we be as the next generation, if we remove that fear from people of I can't provide for myself, I can't feed, then to stop placing so much emphasis on self-fulfillment as I'm complete if I have material goods. And if everybody had, let's say, the same amount of, I'm not talking about excessive, but I'm saying the same amount of ability to get material goods. I could drive a car, have a house. I'm not going to go into such desire and want towards other people in society and the rich, because everybody will have and everybody will enjoy life. And look at how it will take away problems like, because then you're removing your fears and anxieties, which is a lot of the time the reason why people turn to drugs. So if you look at all the levels of rehabilitation that can be done on a societal level, from a monetary point, but also from a teaching us about value and how to work with ourselves, not just to fear ourselves as, oh, we're these demons running loose, but to actually learn about ourselves and learn that we can change ourselves for the better. On all levels, all of those aspects brought together will balance things out in generations to come.
Absolutely, I agree with that, and also with the aspect of mentioning that it will be a process in the making. I mean, we have also discussed how with the provision of a living income, providing higher wages, meaning a person saying, well, if I work in this job, it won't be the low minimum wage, but I will actually get decent amount of money, what do I prefer, risking my life and spend my lifetime in prison or being abused or even killed by the cops or else, or do I rather have the honest making of money and let go of this easy money that is mostly the way of crime in essence. So that will be a process to change essentially from our survival mode that we live in, as you were mentioning, in complete fear all the time, where you see yourself in this harsh necessity of eating, and because we don't have that guaranteed, of course everyone will resort to other ways to get it somehow. So we actually shoot ourselves in the leg in a way, wherein we believe that, well, I only have to care for my own happiness, but if we don't care for each other's happiness, that will backfire to us in the form of criminality. So in this sense of rehabilitation, I really like the idea that it's more like a prevention system. How can we integrate this into our education system, for example?
Well, here you could, already in the home environment where parents are the main educators, you're looking at what is it that a parent is teaching a child about themselves. If I teach my child, you must be scared about that thing, or you must feel bad for doing that. Look at how I'm already molding a child into emotionally reactive experiences. They have just given you two small examples of how the parent in the household, instead of teaching a child to become emotionally reactive and to attach emotional values to themselves, such as I'm beautiful or I'm not beautiful, I'm an ugly little girl, fat little girl, or I'm a pretty girl. If we stop these, because remember what I had mentioned before about, and then the child starts looking at the billboard and sees the model and sees the car and the house, and then she starts going, I can be beautiful too. That stuff starts in the home environment. So, it happens on a quantum level that the parents are programming children extensively in how we communicate with children and the values that we think are benefiting them but are not really. And then the child goes into the school environment where they're taught maths and language and those kind of things, but they're not really taught about this mechanism that's happening inside the mind, because that's quite a machine that we are given, and we're never taught how to deal with it. And then we end up with people with emotional issues and self-destructive thought patterns, and then we end up sending them if they have the money, maybe to a psychologist. And then you end up with people on drugs, which is another, obviously it's been discussed before, we're not going to go into it, but another money-making point is the drug industry. So all of those things we end up downright like, consequence control. But if we work with our education systems of the child in balancing the child to become self-sufficient, stable beings that are here, I'm not dependent on trying to be more beautiful than the next girl or having more toys than the next boy. Platforms, because obviously those are the learning years for the child, and those are the platforms where we as adults can come in. But unfortunately, what we have to consider there is that a lot of these things are tied in with the capitalistic system. So we have to really, as a society, decide that if we change how we bring up our children, they're not going to participate in the money system the way they used to. That's a whole other thing to consider. And the capitalists currently are therefore not going to allow the schooling system to change to make children well-adjusted, balanced beings that are not dependent on buying and consuming and the beauty systems and things. So those are all systems that have to equalize to each other.
Absolutely, becoming the creators of a new education system wherein we consider this integration of the common well-being that we all have to aspire to, instead of this individualistic mindset of fulfilling myself, getting my own happiness, and disregard the rest, because in that we breed competition, we breed disparity and the constant comparison and judging what the other has, so I want it, and so, just resorting to do anything that I can to get that which I want, instead of questioning, what am I really needing? Is it really something that I require to live. So for for further perspectives on this, we've also made hangouts specifically on this psychology of consumerism, which it's very interesting to see how it also links to how to prevent crime in the end. So this is a fascinating perspective that you've given us here. What about then, from your perspective on how a person that is currently going through, let's say, the crime process of punishment, and most of the times they have further problems from getting a criminal record that they cannot reintegrate into society. So what would you propose for a real or genuine process of reintegrating people that have committed crimes into society?
Well, I would say one could consider, as I mentioned right at the beginning, you could consider parental influences. But even if you bring that in, with working with the person and understanding how their mind works, you have a vast amount of information that you can draw from and that the person can bring forth from within themselves to work with themselves. I mean, there are so many tools available for getting to know thyself and actually learning how to change oneself. Well, obviously, for a lot of people, it seems like it might be too late, especially if one experiences like you stuck in a pattern, you are possessed by an experience, but it really doesn't have to be too late. I mean, for myself and for many other people, I have changed from some hectic patterns that I've had to walk through. So I can absolutely understand where you just say to yourself, I can't do this. But you stick to it and you apply it and you change yourself. And then this whole argument of, okay, but what if it's like a programmed response that comes up inside a person? Even that's to say, okay, but what if it's grandparent or my mother had a bad temper or whatever? So now the argument is that you're bringing through DNA information. Even so, it's information that's existent in me. I can bring it up. I've done that, as many have, where I've worked with my experiences, but also what have I inherited from my parents and my grandparents. It's information inside of myself that I can bring, and I can change. I can write it out, understand it, align it inside of myself, and change myself.
Yeah, this is where we also then fully agree that we don't have to stick to what the environment as a major source of influence has shaped us ourselves to be. Because many people say, well, they're born into, let's say, Chicago in New York, so in a low-income household, and they're destined to be dead by the age of 30 because of getting into gang problems and so forth. And we don't really question that, well, we do have the opportunity and the ability to start focusing on I will change and stop kind of like the generational process of continuing this criminal mindset, so to speak, which along, of course, with the provision of a living income, will enable us to really have that security first of, okay, you have your basics guaranteed, you have good wages, you have a living environment that is sustainable. Now let's work with the psychological aspects. So I fully agree that we have to place a lot of emphasis on this psychological aspect that goes unnoticed in the treating of the criminal mindset, which from everything that you've described here, I guess that we can all relate to it. And it is so that then we have to all collectively take responsibility for ourselves, how we participate in society, and ensure that we don't recreate these kind of abusive patterns that we somehow shove under the rug, so to speak, to not really look at them for the harm and abuse that they actually contribute to in this structural violence in our society. So, Andrea, any last words to finalize this hangout? Any solutions, proposals, or any last perspective?
I mean, what you said there, I completely agree with, where you said that if we have an income that supports the being, this is where you're going to be able to see people changing. Because if I'm stuck in a low income, I see no way out, I'm just in fear of survival all the time. Even if somebody came to me and said, hey, you can work on yourself, you can change yourself, I'm probably not going to do that. So what is important for us to understand, which is the points that we brought across in the beginning, it's important for us to understand that we have to make it possible for humanity to be in safe positions, to be able to change ourselves, to be able to work with ourselves. And to do that, we can't say, well, these people, they just have to change, and they have to. If you've ever been in a situation where you feared for your life and you feared where's your next plate of food going to come from and what are you going to do to feed your children, that's a whole nother story. So that's why these 2 points have to be walked in parallel to allow the human being really the time and space to get out of the fear so that we can get into the mind and sort out what's going on.
Absolutely, and fully agree with that. We have a question that's just in from Mats Bjornsti. The most popular view is that crime is a category created by law. How does the current ideology of what crime means contribute to those who define themselves as a non-criminal?
Wow, that's quite a question. I know what you're saying. Sorry, the sound was breaking up a little bit, but I got most of it. So what you're saying is in relation to the person who perceives themselves as a non-criminal, is basically saying that there's laws are creating your laws are saying, okay, we've defined these as crimes, and I'm separating myself the whole time. In society, what is happening is that we're basically saying, I don't see any of that. I don't see. I mean, the biggest problem that we're facing currently is that the mindset that exists for the human being is that we completely have separated ourselves from crime, from even what the government is doing, which is a twofold problem. Also, to bring that in there, is that the governments are saying, okay, we're going to implement these laws, and we're going to say this is how humanity must live, and then humanity gets angry with the fact that we're being controlled and our governments are not doing what is best for us, and it's actually like a triangle effect that's happening, because at the same time we're saying, I am not that, I'm not the rapist and the murderer, and I'm not responsible for the wars. The government is doing it, and the government is saying, but we have to just control the human being over here. The human beings are, first of all, is not taking responsibility for themselves. So as governments, we're standing and controlling the human, and we're making laws, and we're doing our thing over here. And, then the society is getting angry. And if you look at it, it's really like a vicious cycle, unfortunately, that's playing out right now, because everybody's blaming everybody else, and everybody is saying, I'm not that. I don't know, Marlen, if you have more perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very glad that this question came through, because this aspect of self-responsibility is key in understanding how we all contribute to the fact that criminality, poverty, inequality exists, just by the way that we have agreed this entire system to function. And yes, of course, we tend to blame only some culprits here and there, oh, the evil person, but if we don't take responsibility to understand how we all contribute for the monetary system to exist the current way that it is, for people to have low wages wherein they cannot sustain themselves, wherein we don't really even question the thoughts and experiences within ourselves. If we don't do that, then we just easily say, okay, I'm not the criminal, they are the ones to blame. So it is definitely necessary for all of us to start taking into consideration that we all contribute equally to this problem, in an indirect manner, in a tacit manner at the same time. So I fully agree with what you say, Andrea. And we have another question from Bastian Neumann. Don't we, as a society, have created or developed a habit to criminalize everything that does not fit in or interrupts the regular flow of programmed or wanted behavior in any way, without touching the real causes for that specific behavior, problem, or action? Which we have also discussed.
It's always been, yes. I mean, it's interesting how we tend to have to really push the buck on things getting very, very bad before laws are changed. For example, if you look just on the internet on how laws are changing around defamation of character, internet bullying, those kind of things. But at the same time, laws change to still protect the money system. It still protects the people who manage and control things. It's still always just the little person over here that might be, jumping up and down saying, I don't agree with how the system works, very little changes. I mean, even if you look at how capitalism functions, we can bring it back to the example of the factory that collapsed because it wasn't being maintained and all the workers died. A lot of brouhaha is made about this. Oh, they might be charging the owners of the factory. They might. Then they change some laws over here and they do this, and then they'll change laws over there. But at the end of the day, everything actually, have you noticed, remains very much the same. And they will shut down. I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but they'll start shutting down the smaller groups. I mean, if you look at what's happening, for example, even I'll use the example again of Facebook, YouTube. They'll shut down smaller groups, which it's happened to me once before, where they will shut down a group that, for example, speaks up about changing world problems. That's where they'll come in with, we have to be stricter with people that speak up against other people not having rights. And then people go, oh, that sounds great. That's wonderful. Look at what they did for us. So I definitely agree that there's a problem with how things are not always changing, because obviously the people at the top who change and are responsible for these things that are protecting the money system and things like that, they know exactly what they're doing. So we have to change ourselves on an individual level so that we no longer contribute, which is what this whole discussion was about. So we no longer contribute in a energetic and self-value way to the people that are calling us and saying that they are the causes, and they know that we are the cause because we're the ones that are buying and purchasing and participating, and so we have to. It brings it always back to the point of the person becoming self-responsible, and then in the end we will start seeing you could say the system having to change, because the person will stand up and vote and say, I no longer accept that.
Absolutely, which is also goes hand in hand with the living income. If we don't see and recognize this problem as our responsibility, then it's not going to be so easy to get people to vote and to actually create the system as a matter of fact, because there is still this blindfold and blissful ignorance in terms of how we are all co-participants of this. He also places a comment here. Prohibitions are an agreement to criminalize something that people do, want, or have to do without any attempt to deal with the real causes for that particular action, for example. So that's a whole another topic in itself. Do you have any comment?
Yeah, no, I just say that would be a whole another topic to discuss, which would obviously be beneficial in the future if it hasn't already been discussed. Yeah, no, it's very relevant.
Yeah, so Bastian, you're invited for a living income hangout. We can discuss about it, as it would be very interesting to have this discussion. I agree. So we have gone way over time, Andrea. Thanks a lot for your perspectives. Very nurturing and opening our minds to really see where our responsibility to criminality exists.
Thank you.
And thank you, the viewer, for watching. Stay tuned for our next hangout next Sunday at the same time. If you have any questions for Andrea, you can place them on the YouTube link. If you want to be part of these discussions, please also contact us in our Facebook page. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye, Andrea.
Bye.